When the stars are high and the world quiets down, let your thoughts wander. Let them drift like leaves over calm water. Tonight, we step into a forest of memory, where time moves slowly and stories are told in whispers. This is the story of the lost samurai of the Pacific, a man named Hiroo Onoda, who lived by an oath, even as decades passed and the world forgot him. He waited in the jungle, listened to the wind, and stood guard long after the war had ended. This is his story. Hiroo Onoda was born in 1922 in a quiet town nestled along the coast of Wakayama Prefecture, Japan. The sea breathed beside his village, and the hills rose like old guardians wrapped in green. He was the son of a samurai lineage, raised with ancient values, honor, loyalty, discipline. In his childhood, there were stories told by elders of duty that lasted lifetimes, of warriors who fought not for glory, but for a promise. As he grew, he learned to sharpen his senses, not just for battle, but for patience, endurance, awareness. In those early years, he was like a reed in the wind, bending, learning, preparing. The world trembled in the 1940s. A storm called World War II stretched across the globe. Empires clashed like titans, and Japan, strong, proud, took its place among the thunder. Hiroo was just 20 when he joined the Imperial Japanese Army, but he wasn't sent to the front lines. No, he was trained in Futamada, a covert school for guerrilla warfare. There, he learned to become a shadow, to hide in plain sight, to move without being seen, to survive without supplies, to resist, even when all else fell silent. And when he completed his training, he was given a mission, a sacred task, to go to a place few had heard of, Lubang Island, in the Philippines. Lubang was a jewel in the Pacific, wrapped in jungle vines and soft ocean winds. Its shores whispered secrets to the tide, and its heart beat slowly, like a drum buried deep beneath the trees. In December 1944, Lieutenant Onoda stepped onto Lubang, his boots pressing into warm earth, his eyes scanning the green maze ahead. His orders were clear: hold the island, destroy enemy supplies, do not surrender, ever. And Onoda believed, but fate would twist that promise. Just months later, in August 1945, two cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, were struck by a blinding silence. The war ended soon after. Japan surrendered, but Onoda did not know. The jungle became his fortress, a cathedral of leaves and birdsong. Alongside three fellow soldiers, Onoda waited. And when leaflets came fluttering down from the sky, telling of peace, of surrender, they burned them. To deceive us, he thought, to lure us out. And so they stayed. They lived on bananas, stolen cattle, raided rice stores. They patched old uniforms, carried rifles with worn barrels, and listened for signs of an invasion that would never come. One by one, the others gave in to the silence. One surrendered. One was lost to the local police. Another was killed. And then, there was only Onoda. Time passed like water through fingers. The 1950s arrived and left. Men walked on the moon. Nations rose and fell. But in the jungle, Hiroo Onoda remained. He would polish his rifle, stand at attention beneath the stars, and write notes in fading notebooks. He became myth, ghost. Some locals feared him, others pitied him, but Onoda believed. He believed the war continued, that Japan awaited his return, that his mission still mattered. And for him, it did. The jungle is patient. It doesn't rush, it doesn't plead. It simply waits, with green breath and slow footsteps. For Hiroo Onoda, Lubang became a world unto itself, a cradle of trees and silence, and the only place where time no longer mattered. Each morning, Onoda awoke before the sun. He would press his hand to the warm earth, listen for movement, and melt into the brush. He and his comrades built shelters from palm leaves and bamboo, tucked away in places only the wind knew. They moved like ghosts. They tracked shadows. They stored salt, stole matches, cooked rice in old cans. There was no home, only hiding, only the war. And the war, in their minds, had not ended. When it rained, Onoda would collect water in rusted helmets. He learned which fruits fed the belly and which made the heart race. He wrote secret reports in coded notes, messages to no one. He kept his uniform clean, tended his weapon like a sacred relic. For a man trained never to surrender, to stop was unthinkable. Even as the decades turned, he lived not with bitterness, but purpose. In 1949, for years after the war's end, more leaflets arrived, dropped from planes like autumn leaves, announcing peace, urging surrender, but the language felt too polished. The fonts, too clean. To Onoda, they reeked of trickery. He would say later, every Japanese soldier knows it's dishonorable to surrender. If this were real, my superiors would come. So he burned them. In the jungle. Held him closer. Years turned to seasons. Seasons turned to memory. In 1959, his own family thought him dead. A stone memorial was placed in his hometown. Friends moved on. Brothers aged. The world forgot. But Lubang never did. The 1960s bloomed beyond the trees. Television flickered to life. Music echoed through cities. Tokyo lit up with neon. But inside the jungle, Onoda hunted by moonlight. He boiled river water. He patched his worn boots with vines. He whispered strategies to no one but himself. Sometimes, he would look up at the stars, wondering if anyone remembered that he was still there. He saw occasional visitors, farmers, fishermen, hikers. But he remained hidden. To reveal himself was to risk capture. To risk capture was to fail his mission. And failure was unthinkable. He began marking time with nature, counting full moons, noting monsoons, naming new birds as old memories faded. He became a man of the forest, more myth than soldier, more memory than man. In 1974, a new figure entered the story, a curious, bright-eyed traveler named Norio Suzuki. He had left behind city life, books and offices for something different. He told friends, "I want to find three things: Lieutenant Onoda, a panda, and the abominable snowman." And so, with a backpack, a map, and a heart full of wonder, he walked into Lubang's embrace. To most, Onoda was a legend, an old story, a ghost in the trees. But Suzuki believed, and after days of searching, one evening he saw movement in the brush, the faint glint of a blade. He spoke in Japanese. "Onoda-san." There was a pause, a long, trembling silence. Then from the shadows, a voice. "Who sent you?" And just like that, two worlds touched, like leaves brushing in the wind. Suzuki explained the truth. The war was over. Japan was free. The emperor was gone. There was no mission left. But Onoda's eyes stayed hard. His voice calm. He said, "I will not leave until my commander relieves me of duty." Suzuki nodded. He did not mock. He did not push. Instead, he returned to Japan to find that commander, now an old man running a bookstore. Soon, the world would change again. But for now, the jungle stood quiet, holding the breath of nearly 30 years. And Onoda stood still, awaiting orders from a voice he hadn't heard since he was a young man with stars in his eyes and war in his heart. When Norio Suzuki returned to Japan, he carried more than photos and notes. He carried a message. A heartbeat hidden in the trees. "Lieutenant Onoda," he said, "is still on Lubang. He is waiting for his commander." The news moved slowly from newspapers to radio. People were stunned. How could someone still be fighting a war that ended nearly 3 decades ago? Far from the headlines, a man named Major Taniguchi sat in his quiet shop. He had once been Onoda's commanding officer, the one who had said, "You must not surrender." Now, older, grayer, with hands more used to turning pages than maps, he was asked to finish what he had unknowingly started. He agreed and boarded a plane. In March of 1974, Major Taniguchi arrived on Lubang, carrying a crisp uniform, a solemn voice, and words that would echo across time. He stood before the thickets where Onoda, still lean and alert, stepped forward in full military dress. "Lieutenant Onoda," the major said, "you are relieved of all duties. The war is over. You may return home." For a long moment, there was only silence. And then, with slow, deliberate hands, Onoda lowered his rifle, bowed, and wept. Onoda left Lubang wearing his faded uniform, with a working rifle, a sword from his youth, and a heart full of memories that only the trees could understand. He had spent 29 years in the jungle. He was now 52 years old. When he stepped off the plane in Tokyo, cameras flashed, crowds cheered, hands reached for him. But Onoda was still moving in jungle time. Slow, quiet, observing. The world had changed. Skyscrapers scraped the clouds. Cars hummed like machines from dreams. His parents were older. His friends, gone or changed. He had stepped out of a dream and into a future that no longer spoke the language of honor and waiting. Some called him a hero, others a relic. Some wondered, why didn't he surrender? Why wait so long? But Onoda did not try to explain. He only said, "I was a soldier. I had orders. I waited for the right words." And in that quiet sentence, you could hear the rustling of Lubang's trees, the crackle of a campfire under stars, and the silence of a man who had lived in another rhythm. In the busy world, he felt disoriented. He said cities were too loud, the people too fast. So soon, he left. He moved to Brazil, where the forests were familiar. He lived on a ranch, planted trees, and began again. There, surrounded by nature, he found peace. Years passed, and still, people remembered the man who waited. He returned to Japan later in life, not as a soldier, but as a teacher. He wrote his memoir. He spoke to children, not of war, but of patience, duty, belief. He reminded them that discipline is not always about fighting. Sometimes it is about listening, enduring, trusting something greater than yourself. In 2014, Hiroo Onoda passed away peacefully, at the age of 91. But even now, in the hush of a jungle breeze, or the steady rhythm of footsteps through tall grass, you might feel him there, the lost samurai of the Pacific. He was not lost in geography. He was lost in time, carried by duty, held by honor, and remembered not for how he fought, but for how long he believed. So as you rest now, let his story keep you company. Let the stars above whisper of jungles, of devotion, of the quiet kind of courage that doesn't make a sound, but waits. For decades if it must. Good night.